morning. This is Environmental Intelligence, episode 36. It's May 27th, 2026. Your daily briefing on environmental regulatory, science, and compliance developments that matter for Canadian professionals. Alberta commits $5 million to lobbyists securing BC Indigenous support for pipelines, directly affecting project timelines under IAA and provincial environmental assessments. Alberta's pipeline support initiative intersects with ongoing BC forest protection disputes involving salmon habitat. Cross-border enforcement signals from Washington state underscore the need for vigilance on industrial incident reporting. Practitioners should monitor consultation outcomes on pipeline routing and watershed protection this week. Alberta has awarded contracts worth $5 million to lobbyists and consultants tasked with building support among BC Indigenous communities for pipeline projects. This spending targets regulatory approvals under the Federal Impact Assessment Act and BC's Environmental Assessment Act for interprovincial infrastructure. Previous approaches relied on direct proponent engagement. The new strategy shifts costs and coordination to government-funded intermediaries. Consultants managing current pipeline environmental assessments in BC and Alberta must now account for additional stakeholder layers that could extend review periods. Project teams should verify whether these contracts alter expected timelines for Fisheries Act authorizations or Species at Risk Act permitting. Watch for disclosure of specific pipeline routes and any resulting amendments to existing environmental management plans. In Regulatory and Policy Watch, Alberta is directing $5 million through lobbyists to influence BC Indigenous positions on pipelines. This affects compliance planning for any project requiring coordinated federal provincial environmental assessments. Practitioners should track resulting changes to engagement records submitted under the Impact Assessment Act. Local advocates are pressing for protection of a salmon-bearing creek in an urban BC setting. The dispute engages Fisheries Act habitat provisions and potential provincial riparian setbacks under the Water Sustainability Act. Site assessors working near similar watercourses should review current mapping against any new municipal or provincial protections that emerge. In science and technical developments, protecting native forests and controlling invasive species in the Alawai watershed is projected to deliver measurable reductions in urban flood damage and erosion. The findings quantify avoided damages through watershed-scale vegetation management, relevant to Canadian climate adaptation modeling under provincial flood risk frameworks. Practitioners conducting floodplain risk assessments in BC or Ontario should consider analogous vegetation metrics when updating climate-adjusted hydraulic models. In industry and practice, a chemical tank implosion at a Washington pulp and paper mill injured 10 workers with an unknown number of fatalities. Canadian consultants with cross-border clients should confirm incident reporting alignment between Washington State Department of Ecology requirements and equivalent Canadian provincial spill notification rules. Immediate review of emergency response plans for similar facilities in BC is warranted. If you're working on pipeline environmental assessments in BC or Alberta, review Alberta-funded Indigenous engagement records for implications on current projects. Update watershed mapping templates to incorporate vegetation-based flood reduction factors from recent University of Hawaii findings. Monitor any new municipal or provincial protections emerging from the BC urban forest and Salmon Creek dispute. Brief clients on Washington State incident reporting alignment for cross-border pulp and paper facilities. Confirm whether existing environmental management plans require amendment due to new stakeholder coordination layers. In the week ahead, track disclosure of specific pipeline routes tied to Alberta's $5 million Indigenous support contracts in BC and Alberta. Review any municipal updates to riparian protections arising from the BC urban forest dispute. Monitor cross-border spill notification harmonization following the Washington pulp mill incident. Check for new Federal Impact Assessment Act guidance on Indigenous knowledge integration in pipeline reviews. Now, speaking of pipeline environmental assessment coordination, you arrive at a project kickoff meeting for a proposed interprovincial pipeline segment crossing BC and Alberta. The client has already completed a Federal Impact Assessment Act scoping document, yet the new Alberta-funded Indigenous engagement program is not referenced in the work plan. Indigenous knowledge inputs now carry formal weight in Fisheries Act and Species at Risk Act reviews, often requiring iterative mapping of traditional use areas that standard archaeological studies miss. In the field, experienced practitioners notice that routing adjustments driven by these inputs frequently shift away from previously modeled low-risk corridors, triggering new soil and groundwater baseline programs. Both the Impact Assessment Act and BC Environmental Assessment Act now expect documented evidence of how proponent responses to Indigenous concerns altered the final project design. The mistake I see most often is treating engagement records as a static appendix rather than live inputs that must be reconciled against current site investigation data before submission. The fix is straightforward. Schedule a mid-assessment reconciliation workshop with the Indigenous Relations Lead and the Contaminated Sites team to flag any routing changes that affect Phase 2 sampling grids or risk assessment assumptions. Before we wrap, tomorrow watch for any new Federal Impact Assessment Act guidance on Indigenous knowledge integration in pipeline reviews. That's environmental intelligence for today. If this briefing is useful to your practice, share it with a colleague and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're back tomorrow. Have a productive day. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.